It is incredibly strange when you actually stop and just listen to the way we talk about the news.
Yeah, it really is.
I was just thinking about this the other day. You turn on the television or, you're scrolling through your feed, and you constantly hear this one specific pronoun.
Right. The pronoun that kind of just slips by us.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's used in a way that makes, well, absolutely no logical sense if you actually take a second to analyze it. The word is we.
Ah, yes. It's the universal language of modern political communities, really.
It totally is.
We use it constantly, like automatically, without even blinking or, considering the implications of what we're actually saying.
Precisely. You hear someone say, like, well, we invaded that country, or we sanctioned them, or we elected a
Or
disaster.
we completely failed on that policy.
Right. And every time I hear it now, I have this momentary pause where I think, wait a second, who exactly is the we in that
Because
sentence?
it wasn't you personally, obviously.
Right? Because I certainly didn't invade anyone on my Tuesday morning. Yeah. I mean, I was just in my kitchen, making coffee and trying to get out the door.
Exactly. You were not in a situation room.
No, I definitely was not.
You weren't drawing up military logistics or drafting legislation or negotiating trade embargoes.
Not at all.
And yet there is this invisible, I guess you could call it a collective thread, tying you as an individual citizen to those massive geopolitical events.
Just because of where I live.
Right, simply because of where you live and what passport you happen to hold.
And, that gets right to the core of what we are doing today. We are asking you, the listener, a very direct and deeply uncomfortable question.
It is a heavy one, yeah.
It is, we're asking, who exactly is this we? Like, what does a government actually do in your name?
Because if you look at the actual list, it's
Yeah.
genuinely staggering.
It really is. I mean, in your name right now, a government is passing laws. It's collecting taxes. It's waging wars and, policing borders.
Imprisoning people, signing international treaties, regulating entire economies.
Right, and supposedly protecting rights. And, well, if we're being completely honest about how states actually operate,
Sometimes violently violating those rights, yeah.
exactly, it's an incredibly vast apparatus.
And it operates entirely under the banner of its citizens, which, raises the stakes to a level that can feel almost paralyzing.
Paralyzing is a good word for it.
Because if the government acting in your name, claiming to represent your interests, starts an unjust war, or, say, it funds deeply harmful policies, the natural question becomes, does that implicate you?
Right. Are you morally responsible for the actions of the government you live under?
That's the big one.
That is the mission for this deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this because we're taking a magnifying glass to this deeply uncomfortable question today.
We really want to figure out where your personal individual choices end and where the giant grinding machine of the state actually begins.
So let's start breaking down the mechanics of how we even begin to judge this. Where do we start?
Well, to really answer this, we have to start by completely separating two concepts that often get tangled up in our minds.
Okay, what are they?
Individual responsibility and collective responsibility.
Right.
They are not the same thing, but we frequently treat them as if they are totally interchangeable in everyday conversation.
So let's draw a strict line between them right now. What defines individual responsibility in this context?
Think about individual responsibility as the things you have direct agency over.
Okay.
You are normally responsible for what you explicitly choose to do, what you intentionally support, or what you knowingly help bring about in the world.
That was about a direct link.
Exactly. There has to be a direct line between your intention, your action, and the specific outcome, a causal link that traces directly back to your personal choices.
Let's see if I have this. So if I walk into a store, look around to make sure nobody's watching, and I steal an apple,
Right.
that is my individual responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, I formed the intent, I chose to do it, and I executed the physical action.
Exactly, yeah. The missing apple is a direct result of your physical agency. That is a clear, unbroken chain of causality.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But collective responsibility is different.
It operates in an entirely different universe, honestly. It refers to responsibility that is tied simply to your membership in a group.
Membership in a group, like what?
Well, that group could be a company you work for, it could be a university you attend, or a religious institution you belong to, or, in the grandest sense, a nation or a political community.
I see.
And the immense difficulty here is that governments are the ultimate collective institutions.
Because they're so huge.
Right, and their actions are rarely the result of one single person's direct intention.
Yeah, governments are incredibly complex. It's never just one person sitting in a room making every single decision for millions of people.
Even in highly centralized systems, there is a massive bureaucracy.
Right. The actions of a state are the chaotic downstream result of this sprawling, almost incomprehensible web of mechanics.
You have elections, which are inherently messy and full of competing interests.
Uh-huh.
You have massive, entrenched bureaucracies that completely outlast any single politician's term in office.
Judges interpreting centuries-old laws.
Exactly. Military institutions with their own insular internal cultures, the constantly shifting tides of public opinion.
And vast economic systems that exert immense pressure on all those decision makers.
Exactly. So no single citizen, not even the most powerful elected official, controls all of this.
It's kind of like a giant Rube Goldberg machine,
Oh,
right?
yeah, that's a great way to picture it.
Where one gear turns another, a marble drops down a chute, a balloon pops, and eventually, like, a policy just pops out the other end.
Which is exactly why we have to completely reject the simplistic mathematical equation that people often fall back on when discussing politics.
What equation is that?
Where people say that a government action equals every single citizen's personal action.
Right, we did this.
Yeah, that equation simply does not map onto reality. It ignores the sheer friction and diffusion of power within a state.
I'm trying to picture how this works in a different context to see if the logic actually holds up.
I'm sure. Go for it.
Let's say I work in the mailroom of a massive multinational corporation.
Okay, I like where this is going.
I'm just sorting envelopes on the ground
I
floor.
see, right.
Meanwhile, the CEO, who I have never met, who works in an entirely different state, makes a backdoor deal to illegally pollute a river to cut manufacturing costs.
Classic corporate villain stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, no one in their right mind would look at me, the guy pushing the mail cart, and say, I personally polluted the river just because I happen to wear the company badge on a lanyard around my neck.
Right.
So why do we suddenly treat a country differently? Why do we assume the citizen in the metaphorical mailroom is morally on the hook for the political CEO?
The mailroom analogy is fantastic because it really highlights the absurdity of assigning direct guilt to someone at the bottom of a hierarchy.
Right. It seems ridiculous.
But, and this is a big but, we need to add a crucial layer of nuance to that scenario.
Okay.
Just because you aren't physically holding the pipe that is dumping pollution into the river, and just because you aren't the one sitting in the boardroom signing off on the illegal policy, that doesn't automatically mean you have absolute zero responsibility regarding the situation.
Wait, I want to push back on that immediately.
Yeah.
How could I possibly have responsibility for something I didn't do, didn't plan, and initially didn't even know about? My job is just sorting the mail.
Let's follow the scenario forward a bit.
Yeah.
What if you eventually found out about the pollution?
Okay, I'm listening.
What if you realized that your daily labor, even something as mundane as sorting the mail, was keeping the administrative side of this corrupt company functioning?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm part of the machine.
Right. And what if you had the ability to blow the whistle or to organize with other mailroom workers and administrative staff to demand a change in company policy?
But I don't. I just put my head down.
Exactly. You just keep sorting the mail because it's the path of least resistance. In that case, you absolutely did not cause the pollution. But your ongoing relationship to the company and your capacity to act means you might have a moral responsibility to respond to it once you know it's happening.
I mean, that logically follows, yeah.
Yeah.
But my mailroom analogy really only works if I have absolutely no say in who the CEO is, right?
That is the key difference, yes.
Because I was just hired to do a job. I didn't elect the board of directors.
Mm.
But what happens in a system where the citizens explicitly hold the power to choose the leadership?
It changes everything.
Because that fundamentally shifts the foundation of the relationship, doesn't it?
It changes the entire dynamic.
Yeah.
And this brings us to one of the most difficult parts of this whole discussion, the democratic dilemma.
The democratic dilemma.
Yeah. The philosophical case for citizen responsibility is actually strongest within a functioning democracy.
Just because we get to cast a ballot every couple of years, that seems, I don't know, like a very thin thread to hang massive moral responsibility on.
Well, it isn't just the physical act of dropping a piece of paper in a box, you know. That ballot represents actual, tangible power.
Power that the mailroom guy doesn't have.
Exactly. In a functioning democracy, citizens possess tools that the mailroom worker simply doesn't have. You have voting rights. You have freedom of expression to publicly criticize the leadership without fear of being vanished.
Right.
You have access to information, the ability to organize with your neighbors, the right to protest in the streets, and multiple avenues to influence public policy.
So if citizens possess all of this political power, if they are the ultimate arbiters of who gets to pull the levers of the state, then it stands to reason that they also bear some degree of responsibility for how that power is ultimately used.
Exactly. And there is a fascinating philosophical inconsistency here that ethicists often point out. A democracy cannot claim its fundamental legitimacy by saying the government represents the will of the people, and then turn around and say the people have absolutely nothing to do with the government's actions the exact second those actions become morally troubling.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you simply can't have it both ways.
You really can't.
It's like you can't take credit for the sunshine and then blame the rain on someone else.
Exactly.
If the government's entire claim to power is derived from the consent of the governed, then the government's moral failings must somehow reflect back on those who provided that consent.
Precisely. Democratic citizenship seems to create at least a baseline of responsibility. But the moment we establish that, we really have to look closely at the actual mechanism of consent.
You mean the act of voting?
Yes, because voting is incredibly complicated. Suppose you vote for a candidate, right?
Yeah.
That candidate wins the election.
Okay.
Later, the government they lead adopts policies that severely harm people. Are you, the voter, responsible for that harm?
Man, the reality of politics makes that incredibly murky.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer has to depend heavily on the context of the vote itself, right?
It depends entirely on what you knew and what you actively supported when you cast that ballot.
So how do we separate that out?
To make sense of this, ethicists divide this into two distinct categories: foreseeable policies and unexpected actions.
Okay, let's break down the foreseeable category first.
Sure. So if a politician openly promises to enact discriminatory policies on the campaign trail, right?
Yeah.
If they promise unlawful repression of a minority group, or they explicitly campaign on launching an aggressive, unprovoked war, and you, as a voter, go to the ballot box and you vote for them because of those promises.
Then my moral responsibility is incredibly strong.
It is incredibly strong.
Because I knew exactly what I was buying. Like, the intention was clear.
Yes. You didn't directly carry out the act of repression yourself,
Yeah.
and you didn't physically fire a weapon in the war, but you deliberately helped empower the specific person who did.
Knowing full well what they intended to do.
Exactly. This resembles other forms of indirect responsibility in our legal and moral systems. If you knowingly help someone gain the power to cause a specific harm, you cannot stand back later and claim innocence just because you weren't the one who finalized the paperwork.
You know, here is a great way to visualize that. It's exactly like lending your car to a friend.
Oh, I like this.
If they tell you straight to your face, hey, I am going to use your car as a getaway vehicle in a bank robbery, and you hand over the keys, you are absolutely responsible for your part in that robbery.
You empowered the act.
Exactly. But, and this is the flip side, if they say, hey, I just need to run down to the grocery store to grab some milk, and then they spontaneously decide to rob a bank on the way home, you aren't morally responsible for the robbery.
That is a perfect illustration of the second category, unexpected actions.
The grocery run gone wrong.
Exactly. Suppose the leader you voted for later does something terrible that they never promised, something you strongly oppose, and crucially, something you could not have reasonably predicted based on their past behavior, their political platform, or their rhetoric.
Right.
In that scenario, your responsibility as a voter is vastly diminished, if not entirely erased.
Because I was essentially lied to, or, the politician just went entirely rogue. I gave them the keys for a grocery run, and they took it to a bank.
Exactly. Voting does not mean you are signing a blank check offering unlimited moral endorsement of everything a government might decide to do in the future.
That would be insane.
Right. Political responsibility has to remain connected to human reality. It must be intimately connected to knowledge, intention, and foreseeability. If you couldn't possibly foresee the action, you couldn't have intended to support it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for the people who actually voted for the ruling party.
Yeah.
If I vote for the robber, knowing they're a robber,
Yeah.
I am implicated.
Yes.
If I vote for the person going for groceries and they turn into a robber, my hands are mostly clean of the initial act.
Right.
But what if I actively voted against the ruling party? What if I saw the robber coming? I voted for the other person, but the robber won anyway. How can I possibly bear any responsibility then? I actively tried to stop them from getting the keys.
This is where the philosophy gets genuinely difficult and pretty uncomfortable. Let's look at the active opponent.
Let's do it.
Imagine you didn't just vote against the ruling party. Imagine you actively protested its policies. You marched in the streets, you organized petitions, you publicly opposed the unjust war they started.
I'm out there doing everything I can.
Right. Are you still somehow responsible simply because you carry the passport of that country?
I mean, it feels incredibly unjust to say yes. It feels like you are lumping the fierce protester in with the enthusiastic supporter, punishing the person who tried to stop the fire.
And that is exactly why we cannot say yes in the same way. It would be a catastrophic moral failure to say the protester and the supporter share the same burden.
Thank goodness.
Right. Moral responsibility must possess the nuance to distinguish between active support, active opposition, total indifference, and active resistance.
Citizenship alone cannot be allowed to act as like a solvent that erases those vital differences in personal agency.
Exactly.
So the dissenter is completely off the hook.
Well, not entirely.
Wait, really?
Even fierce opposition might not remove every ounce of responsibility. If we step back and view this through the lens of ongoing civic duty, we start to see a very vital distinction in ethics.
Okay, I'm with you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a fundamental difference between responsibility for causing government wrongdoing and responsibility for responding to it.
Wait, let me make sure I'm conceptualizing this correctly. Responsibility for responding. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means that while you are absolutely not responsible for causing the unjust war, because you voted against the leaders who started it and protested their actions, your status as a citizen in that society might still give you ongoing duties.
Ongoing duties.
Duties to continue speaking out, duties to resist where possible, duties to help the victims of your government's policies, and duties to support political alternatives.
I see.
Your absolute innocence in causing the problem doesn't free you from the obligation of trying to fix it, because it is still your political community generating the harm.
Oh, I see the distinction. It's the difference between starting a fire in your neighborhood and being obligated to grab a bucket of water because it's your neighborhood that is burning.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't the arsonist, but you are still a neighbor.
Exactly.
But let me throw a curveball at you.
Okay, ready?
What if I just wash my hands of the whole thing?
Ah, the non-voter.
Yeah. What if I look at the political landscape and say, politics is corrupt, all the candidates are terrible, the system is rigged, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't vote.
Yeah.
I don't participate. I don't protest. I just go to work, pay my bills, and live my life.
It happens all the time.
Right. Since I didn't vote for anyone, I didn't empower anyone, so I have zero responsibility, right?
It is very tempting to believe that. The "I don't vote, so I am not responsible" defense is incredibly common.
It sounds fear-proof.
But ethically, this is not an automatic shield. In fact, deliberately withdrawing when you have a meaningful chance to participate actually contributes indirectly to the political outcome.
Wait, how does that work? By doing literally nothing, I am somehow doing something.
Yes, because politics is a zero-sum game of influence. When you remove your voice, you mathematically amplify the voices of those who do participate.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about it like that.
Right. Now, not voting can stem from many different places. It can mean deep apathy and total indifference to the suffering of others.
Sure.
It can mean heartbreaking resignation, a feeling that the system is so heavily broken your vote truly doesn't matter. Or it can be a principled refusal to choose among universally bad options.
Right. Sometimes it genuinely feels like choosing between a paper cut and a stubbed toe, and people just prefer to walk away.
And those internal motivations are not morally identical. The apathetic person and the principled abstainer are not the same.
Okay.
But, and this is the critical point, political non-participation does not grant you automatic innocence regarding the outcome.
Why not?
If you are in a situation where you could oppose a serious injustice, where you could vote against dangerous policies or support better alternatives, and you simply choose not to engage, there is profound moral weight to that omission.
So choosing not to act is still a choice that has consequences.
Exactly. The underlying principle here is one we recognize in everyday morality. Sometimes failing to act matters morally when action was reasonably available to you.
Like a bystander situation.
Exactly. Let's use a classic ethical scenario. If you see someone drowning in a shallow pool and you just walk past because you didn't personally push them in.
You're so morally failing.
Yes, because you could have easily helped without risking your own life. In a democracy, if you can oppose severe injustice with something as simple as casting a ballot, and you choose to stay home and watch television, You bear some responsibility for that omission.
I'm following the logic. If I have power, even a tiny incremental bit of power like a sinnable vote, I have responsibility. Choosing not to use it is an active choice.
Correct.
But let's look at scenarios where our agency is actively removed. What about the things the government forces us to do? What happens when my hand is forced, specifically regarding the elephant in the room? Taxes.
Taxes. Taxes are perhaps the most difficult, stubborn aspect of this entire debate
Right.
because they involve an unavoidable intersection of personal resources and state action.
The government uses our money for absolutely everything. I mean, they use it for healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Things most people agree are good.
Right. But they also use my tax dollars for military spending, mass surveillance, keeping prisons running, and border enforcement. If my specific tax dollars fund an unjust military operation, am I morally complicit in that operation because I literally paid for it?
Usually no, not in a simple, direct sense of complicity.
Oh, really?
And the reason comes down to one powerful word: coercion.
Coercion.
Taxes are compulsory. You cannot legally attach a note to your tax return saying, please use this portion of my taxes for building hospitals, but I'd like to formally opt out of funding this specific military operation.
It's basically extortion by the state. I would love to see the IRS's reaction to a line item veto on a 1040 form.
They would reject it outright, obviously. And if you continually refuse to pay, the state would seize your assets, freeze your bank accounts, or eventually put you in jail.
Right.
This element of state coercion significantly weakens your personal moral responsibility for how the funds are used.
Because I don't really have a choice. Exactly. There is a massive fundamental difference between voluntarily writing a check to finance a rogue militia because you believe in their cause and paying your mandatory taxes under a general legal obligation to the state.
Okay, that makes sense.
The state's threat of force severs the link of intentionality that is required for direct moral complicity.
That is a relief, honestly, because it feels impossible to untangle where every dollar goes. But I assume this doesn't mean paying taxes gives me a completely clean conscience.
You anticipate the friction point perfectly. Coercion removes the direct guilt of intending to fund the act, but it doesn't remove every moral question.
Well, of course it doesn't.
As a citizen whose money is being utilized to execute these actions, you still possess those residual duties we discussed earlier.
The duty to respond.
Right. Duties to demand accountability, to oppose those specific uses of public money through your speech, and to support structural reform. Paying taxes under duress doesn't make you fully responsible, but it ties you to the system intimately enough that your ongoing political participation still matters.
Let's take this concept of coercion and scale it all the way up to the maximum level.
Okay.
If taxes are coercive, what about a system where everything is coercive? Let's talk about authoritarian regimes. We are talking about places with fake elections, where political opposition is flat out illegal, the media is entirely controlled by the state.
And if you protest, you don't just get ignored, you go to a labor camp or you get killed.
Exactly. In those scenarios, does the citizen have any responsibility?
In those scenarios, the moral picture changes dramatically, and the calculus of responsibility shifts entirely. Can ordinary people living under a brutal dictatorship be blamed for what their government does on the world stage?
I would think not.
The consensus is that their responsibility is drastically fundamentally reduced.
Because they have zero political power, they aren't voters, they are hostages.
Exactly. A person cannot reasonably be held morally responsible for the actions of an institution that they cannot choose, they cannot influence, and they cannot safely oppose.
That makes total sense.
It is a cruel absurdity to blame a terrified citizen for the actions of a dictator holding a gun to their head. The machinery of the state has completely divorced itself from the will of the people.
But they still have some choices,
Yeah.
right? Even in a dictatorship, people make decisions about how they exist within that system.
They do, and that is where their individual moral agency lies. They still face harrowing daily choices between collaboration and resistance.
Right.
Some people will actively collaborate, inform on their neighbors, and benefit from the repression to advance their own status. Others will quietly resist, share underground information, or risk everything to protect targeted individuals.
All huge choices.
Those individual choices matter immensely and carry deep moral weight. But the mere fact of living under the regime, of surviving day to day as a subject of that state, is not enough to establish guilt for the state's broader crimes.
This brings us to a really elegant synthesis. If we look at democracies, the coercion of taxes, and the extreme lack of agency in dictatorships, What is the golden thread tying this all together? So what does this all mean?
If there's a central thesis to this entire deep dive, it is this. Responsibility should generally track power.
Responsibility should generally track power.
Yes. The more political power, freedom, and access to information you have, the more responsibility you bear for the outcomes your society produces. The less control someone has, the less responsibility they bear. It is a sliding scale based directly on human agency.
I really like that formulation. And if that is true, if responsibility literally scales up and down based on an individual's specific power, then the way we usually talk about global politics is completely broken.
Completely broken.
Treating every single person in a country as equally guilty for a government's actions isn't just factually wrong, it's incredibly dangerous, isn't it?
It is profoundly dangerous. And this leads us directly into the trap of collective guilt. This is one of the most toxic, historically destructive ideas in human history.
This is when people look at a conflict on the news and say, well, their country did this, or they elected those leaders, so they are all responsible for what happens to them now.
Yes. It is the language that flattens a vastly diverse population into a single guilty monolith.
Just a single faceless blob.
Exactly. When someone says they're all responsible, they are taking a country that contains enthusiastic government supporters, completely passive citizens, fierce political opponents, prisoners of conscience, refugees, and people entirely disenfranchised from the voting system, and they are tossing them all into the exact same bucket of moral condemnation.
It completely erases the protester we were talking about earlier. Says the person marching against the war, risking getting beaten by police, is exactly as guilty as the general directing the war.
And historically, this erasure is not just an academic mistake debated in university philosophy departments. This idea of collective guilt is the exact logic used to justify hatred, rampant discrimination, collective punishment, and the deliberate targeting of civilians in conflicts.
Wow.
It destroys individual moral judgment and replaces it with tribal vengeance. We have to violently reject the idea that citizens bearing some collective responsibility for their political community somehow justifies collective punishment.
And the most obvious, undeniable flaw in this whole collective guilt idea has to be children.
Yeah.
They instantly break the logic of collective blame.
Absolutely. The child is the ultimate proof that collective guilt is absurd. A baby born into a nation today did not elect its leaders.
Of course not.
That child did not approve the state's wars, it did not construct the systemic inequalities, and it certainly did not create the institutions it is forced to live under. Treating a child as morally guilty for the state's actions is a complete logical and moral failure.
But what about when that child grows up? Because this gets into the idea of future generations. If you are born into a country, you don't just inherit the nice parks, the art museums, and the functioning highways.
No, you inherit the bad stuff too.
You inherit massive, generation-spanning burdens. You inherit national debts, broken treaties with other nations, environmental damage that was done decades ago, and the crushing weight of historical injustices.
This is where we have to draw another crucial philosophical line, similar to the one we drew earlier between causing a problem and responding to it.
Okay, what's the line here?
When dealing with history, we must distinguish between guilt and repair. Future generations are not personally guilty for acts committed before they were born. It is logically impossible to be guilty of an action that occurred when you did not exist.
Right. I didn't sign the broken treaty in 1850. I didn't emit the industrial carbon in 1920 that is warming the planet today.
But, and this is a heavy obligation, you may still have deep responsibilities to repair the ongoing consequences of those historical actions.
Because I'm here now.
Exactly. You have a responsibility to acknowledge the true history of your community and to work to improve the institutions you inherited.
Let's try to map this onto a tangible scenario. It's exactly like moving into an old historic house.
Okay, let's hear it.
You didn't break the plumbing. You didn't let the roof rot for 50 years before you bought it. You hold absolutely zero personal guilt for the degraded state of that house.
Right. The previous owner did that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But because you live there now, because it is your house and you are sheltering inside it, it is absolutely your responsibility to fix the roof and stop the leak. You can't just sit in the living room while it floods, watch the water rise, and say, well, I didn't build it.
Exactly. The house analogy works perfectly because it firmly separates guilt from duty. You lack the guilt of the negligent builder, but you hold the responsibility of the current resident.
Right.
But let's push your house analogy a little bit further into darker territory to see how ethicists deal with the really difficult questions.
Darker territory.
Okay. Fixing the roof makes sense because you bought the house. But what if you found out the house you moved into, the house you are currently enjoying and raising your family in, was actually stolen from someone else a generation ago?
Oh, well, that fundamentally changes the nature of my relationship to the house.
What if you are passively benefiting from an injustice? This is one of the thorniest issues in political morality, the concept of benefiting without causing.
So we are talking about a situation where I didn't commit the original crime, I didn't support the policy that allowed it, but I am directly reaping the rewards of it today.
Precisely. Suppose your society gained massive tracts of land, incredible wealth, geopolitical security, or intense economic advantages through historical or even current injustices toward others.
And I am just living my life, using that wealth, living on that land, benefiting from the infrastructure built by that injustice.
Right. Do those passive benefits create a moral responsibility for you? The general consensus among ethicists is yes, though again, it does not create guilt.
Right, because I wasn't there.
You are not guilty of causing the original injustice if you weren't there. But if you continue to benefit from it, all while knowing perfectly well that others are still bearing the devastating cost of that injustice today, that dynamic creates a responsibility.
Because I'm essentially holding stolen goods. Even if I wasn't the thief who broke into the vault, I'm the one spending the money.
Exactly. It creates a duty for you to support repair, to correct those unfair structures, and at the bare minimum to acknowledge what actually happened.
That makes a lot of sense.
Moral responsibility doesn't just arise from the bad things you do directly. It can also arise from unfairly benefiting from persistent harm done to others, especially if you actively resist efforts to make things right.
That is heavy, but it makes logical sense.
It leads me to another question about how we act in the present, not just looking at history.
Okay.
What if you know the government is doing something wrong right now? You aren't necessarily benefiting from it, but you just decide to stay quiet. You keep your head down, mind your business, and say nothing.
The morality of silence. This raises an important question. Is silence consent?
People say that all the time, right? Silence is complicity. But is it really? Or is that just a slogan? We have to be careful with absolute statements because human behavior is driven by incredibly complex factors. People stay quiet for a multitude of very human reasons.
Like what?
Sometimes it is sheer fear of retaliation, if speaking up means losing your job, or worse. Sometimes it is uncertainty. They just don't feel they know enough about the nuanced geopolitical situation to feel comfortable taking a firm public stance. Often, it is just exhaustion.
That is a very real factor. Life is hard. People are tired trying to pay rent and raise kids.
Exactly. But if we're talking about a relatively free society, a place where citizens have access to accurate information, where they possess political freedom, and where they have a reasonable expectation of physical safety, then persistent silence becomes highly problematic from a moral standpoint.
Why is that?
If you live in those favorable conditions and you simply ignore severe wrongdoing because you say to yourself, well, it doesn't affect me personally, then your silence begins to actively normalize the injustice.
It's the ultimate bystander problem, just scaled up to a national level.
It is. When enough people in a political community decide that a severe injustice is someone else's problem, the government learns that it has a blank check. The wrongdoing becomes part of the background noise of society.
Right.
By choosing not to use your voice when it is safe and possible to do so, you contribute to the environment that allows the injustice to continue unchallenged.
Let me stop and play devil's advocate for a second, because listening to this, it feels incredibly demanding.
It does, yeah.
We are talking about voting perfectly while predicting the future, protesting constantly, refusing to benefit from historical injustices, breaking our silence on every issue. Are we expecting ordinary citizens who are just trying to get their kids to school, pay their mortgage, and survive modern life to be full-time, flawless political watchdogs? Because that feels entirely unworkable in the real world.
You are absolutely right to push back on that, and ethicists completely agree with you. We have to ground this philosophical conversation in everyday reality.
Yeah.
It is completely impossible to research every single obscure policy, to protest every minor injustice, or to deeply understand every arcane government decision. People have jobs, they have personal problems, health crises, and families that need their immediate attention.
So how do we balance this?
Yeah.
What is actually reasonably required of us as citizens?
Political responsibility must be anchored to reasonable expectations. We cannot demand perfect, unsleeping political vigilance. That is a standard for a saint, not a citizen. But we can demand a baseline.
What does that baseline look like in practice?
It looks like staying basically informed about the major consequential actions of your government. It means voting responsibly where you have the opportunity, rather than treating elections like a joke.
Okay.
It means actively choosing not to support obvious, glaring injustices. And it means speaking up or taking action when the harms cross the line into severe territory. You don't have to fight every single battle, but total willful indifference to the massive actions taken in your name is inexcusable.
I want to bring up something that complicates this dynamic even more. And it's something I see all the time in everyday life. Let's call it the patriotism paradox.
I'm intrigued. How does the paradox work?
Well, people absolutely love to identify with the achievements of their country. You see the Olympics on television and people say, we won the gold medal. Or they talk about history and say, we built the space program or we cured this disease.
Right. The we comes back.
Exactly. Now, the person sitting on their couch eating potato chips certainly didn't run the 100-meter dash, and they didn't engineer a rocket. But they enthusiastically claimed the we. So if we are so willing to share the collective pride for the good stuff, can we really reject the collective responsibility when the history is shameful?
Yes, because the distinction you're drawing there is exactly what points to a deep hypocrisy in how we relate to our nations. If you are eager to claim the collective glory, you cannot instantly become a radical, atomized individualist the moment the nation's crimes are brought up.
You can't say we won the war, but then immediately pivot to the government committed the atrocities.
Exactly. Now, ethicists will point out that pride and guilt aren't totally symmetrical. Feeling pride in your community's achievements doesn't literally mean you think you built the rocket. And acknowledging your community's crimes doesn't mean you personally pulled the trigger.
Right.
But it does point to a deeper truth about what it means to belong to a nation and claim it as your own.
Which is what, ultimately?
That mature patriotism requires much more than blind cheerleader celebration. It requires the civic courage and responsibility to remember, to acknowledge, and to directly confront the national wrongs. Real patriotism isn't just waving a flag. It is saying, this harm was done by the political community I belong to, and therefore I have a duty to help us do better.
That is a really profound way to look at it. We've covered an immense amount of ground here today, from the mailroom to this historic house to the voting booth. Can you bring it all together for the listener?
I can try.
Give us the final verdict on the core question we started with. Are you morally responsible for the actions of the government you live under?
After looking at all the layers, the nuances of voting, coercion, and history, the most honest, accurate answer we can give is sometimes, and to different degrees.
So it's fundamentally not a simple yes or no.
It cannot be. Citizenship is not the exact same thing as complicity. Belonging to a country does not automatically make you morally complicit in every single thing its government does.
Right, otherwise the dissident and the dictator are the same.
Exactly. If we believed that, then there would be absolutely no moral difference between a brutal dictator giving the orders and a dissident rotting in one of their prisons. They both belong to the same country, but their moral weight is worlds apart.
So how do we measure our own responsibility?
We measure it by remembering that your political responsibility always scales with your power, your knowledge, your freedom, and your participation. A president, a committed voter, a silent bystander, a brave protester, and a child simply do not bear the same moral burden.
What is the main takeaway you want the listener to hold on to?
The takeaway is this critical distinction. We may not always be personally guilty for what governments do in our name. We didn't cause it. But we still have deep responsibilities concerning what they do.
Responsibilities to act.
Yes. We have a responsibility to oppose injustice, to refuse complicity when we can, and to demand accountability. The political community you live in gives you rights, it gives you benefits, and it gives you a voice. The moral burden of citizenship lies entirely in how you choose to use that voice or how you fail to use it.
That is incredibly clear and gives us a lot to process. But before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on.
Ooh, I love a good final thought.
We've established today that your personal responsibility shrinks when you lack power and you lack knowledge. If you don't know what's happening and you can't control it, you aren't as responsible.
That is the core principle of agency we discussed, yes.
But consider the future we are walking into right now. Governments are increasingly handing over massive life-altering decisions to artificial intelligence and complex black box algorithms.
That is a terrifying reality, yeah.
Right. They are using opaque code to approve or deny welfare benefits, to map out predictive policing in neighborhoods. and even to identify military targets.
Yeah.
If a completely impenetrable algorithm commits a serious injustice in your name, and not even the politicians who bought the software fully understand how the code makes its decisions, where does your civic responsibility to demand accountability go?
Wow.
How do you hold the government accountable when there is no human left in the decision-making loop to actually hold accountable? Something to think about.
A chilling but absolutely necessary question for the era we are entering.
Well, that brings us to the end of our exploration today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you hear someone on the news say, we did this or we did that, I guarantee you will never hear that tiny little word the exact same way again. Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.